Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Queer Faculty and Staff of Color Experiences and Expectations presentation. My name is Danielle Aguilar. I'm the current Associate Director of the Upward Bound Programs at Monterey Bay. The co-author of the chapter for this presentation is Dr. Joshua Moon Johnson, who's the Dean of Students at American River College in the Sacramento area. So I want to begin by giving some context of what was happening in the US while we were conducting this study. The study was conducted in 2014-2015, which was under the second Obama administration. We start seeing the increased national activism regarding police brutality and Black Lives Matter and protest based on the murders of Eric Gardner and Mike Brown. The Supreme Court upholds the Michigan law banning the use of racial criteria in college admissions. The NBA bans the Los Angeles Clippers owner Donald Sterling in response to leaked recording of Sterling being explicitly racist in his remarks and comments. The Supreme Court also rules that insurance companies can refuse insurance coverage for contraceptives based on religious beliefs. At this time, over 20 women come forward accusing Bill Cosby of sexual assault. 35 states have recognized same-sex marriage at this point, and the Republican Party wins seats in the House and the Senate to take control of Congress. So I just wanted to share a little bit of the context of what was happening within the US while the study was taking place. The purpose of this study is to highlight the lived experiences of queer faculty and staff of color at colleges and universities across the country. The following research aims to give voice to populations on college campuses that are often overlooked or marginalized, and therefore provide insight on how to better support them. So just to give you some insight about our participants and our study, we had 18 participants total. University roles included administrators, faculty, lecturers, and staff. The racial identities of participants were African American, Asian American, Asian International, Black, Chicana, Indian, Middle Eastern, multiracial, Native American, person of color, and Latinx. The sexual orientations of our participants included bisexual, fluid, gay, homoflexible, lesbian, pansexual, and queer. The gender identities included cis women, cis men, genderqueer, transgender, and transsexual individuals. And additional identities that were highlighted by our participants were ability, adoptee, and religion. Our participants lived in rural, urban, and suburban areas and were members of both public, private, small, large, liberal arts, and research colleges and universities throughout the US. So our study was consisted of qualitative phone interviews and an open-ended questionnaire of 21 questions. So how we let people know about this study was primarily through Facebook groups that existed. The Facebook groups were a lot of where we put this information was in NASPA knowledge communities or the ACPA coalitions that exist to support various racial, ethnic, sexual orientation, and gender identities. And so that's really where we did a lot of our recruitment was through online platforms and groups such as Facebook. Our questions allowed participants to self-identify their own social identities. So it was very much so an open-ended question, no multiple choice provided in that regard. We asked about their positions within their institution just to get more understanding about their positionality, and as well as the location and the type of institution that they were currently working in. We asked about their recruitment process, the surrounding community, the support systems both in work and their personal life, and we also asked about campus climate and institutionally supported resources. For our literature review, we based our work off of previous research regarding faculty of color, LGBTQ faculty and staff, and general QT/BIPOC research. So what we found when we were conducting the study in 2015 was there's not a lot of research on QT/BIPOC faculty and staff of color. You either find the faculty of color research, the LGBTQ faculty and staff research, but not so much at that intersection. So for us, it was really important to make sure we did a deep dive into each of these different categories to fully understand the context in which we were coming in and the previous research that had been done that we might be able to gain or provide some more insight with our specific study. So within our interviews, we found 5 different themes that emerged: microaggressions, what we call double burden, institutional support, lack of inclusivity, and limited views of diversity. So for microaggressions, we use Sue et al.'s definition of racial microaggressions as brief common occurrences that can be verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities. This was probably one of the most common themes amongst all of our participants, and they range from being shut down to a lack of eye contact being made with them, to being assumed heterosexual, to verbal aggressions that truly toed harassment and or more macroaggressions. Some examples that we wanted to highlight: Selena, a queer Chicana at a small liberal arts school in the Northeast, mentioned, "The white folks in the room speak over me and shut down my ideas. Many get uncomfortable when I want to talk about dynamics of power that come into play when we attempt to work together." Similarly, Inez, a bisexual female Latina staff member from California, said that she would get a lot of comments or questions about who's the man in the relationship. So really, when trying to build connections with coworkers and just talk about and share personal life insights, really gaining these questions that were very heteronormative and just inappropriate regarding her relationship. So there were definitely continuous microaggressions that did result in some people mentioning that they had left their position, but most people did not have the flexibility to leave their position or the area for various reasons. But microaggressions overall did take a toll, and that came out in pretty much every interview that we conducted. So double burden, how we defined this or conceptualize this is QT BIPOC faculty and staff members are often expected to mentor all the students of their racial background because they're often the only ones in their department, as well as mentor the LGBTQ students because students gravitate to them once they find out that they openly identify as LGBTQ. In addition to mentoring QT BIPOC, faculty and staff are often expected to represent departments, advocate for marginalized group, and lead all diversity initiatives, or be involved in all diversity initiatives. Many of our participants expressed feeling overly tapped. Although they enjoyed the work and they felt that it was important, they often felt pulled in many directions, along with having to perform their daily duties. One of our participants, Serenity, a Black bisexual STEM faculty member in the Midwest, mentioned, "Also, naturally, I'm beginning to get a lot of requests for service. I get a lot of feedback from tenured faculty to hunker down, try to push through, and to not do anything but focus on my work. I constantly consider leaving this opportunity for a place that would be professionally worse, but personally easier." So again, when we're thinking about tenure track positions and how women of color and Black women specifically fit into the national context of tenure track and tenured faculty, and then on top of that, Serenity being openly bisexual and in the STEM field, and just really feeling and expressing as if she was being pulled in multiple directions, and kind of having to decide, is she going to be a part of these initiatives to push these things forward that she feels passionate about and that are a part of who she is, or is she going to be focusing on getting tenure within her institution? Another example is Erica, a queer Black female at a small public urban school in the South, mentioned, "My colleagues view me as an expert on LGBT issues." Again, this was something that was prominent amongst many of our participants, just having to be, the representative for all things LGBT or all things POC, and just feeling that burden and that sense of being overtapped. The next theme that we had, we labeled lack of inclusivity. So campus climate is often talked about in regards to how students experience college. However, faculty and staff members often feel a lack of inclusion within the campus community. So according to Rankin Associate study that was done back in 2010, LGBTQ faculty respondents were significantly less likely than LGBTQ staff respondents to feel very comfortable or comfortable with their department, work, unit climate. So meaning that, faculty felt less, LGBTQ faculty felt less comfortable and less very comfortable than the LGBTQ staff respondents. And, we kind of found similar things as well. One of our participants, Elizabeth, a queer woman of color administrator in the South at a large suburban public university, said, "My queer identity was not supported in the ethnic cultural groups to which I belong. The queer support group on campus currently does not have any people of color in leadership." Again, Serenity shared, "Like much of my life, I feel between worlds, not quite accepted in Black communities, but not white, not quite accepted in LGBTQ community, but not straight. I feel like I constantly don't belong anywhere." So really, staff and faculty members both expressing kind of the sense of having to choose between, one of their identities and just not feeling like there is a place for them at work in which they can truly bring their whole self and be supported with all of their identities. Institutional support was another theme. So participants had a range of expectations for the institution regarding how they would be supported as LGBTQ faculty and staff of color. Most expected to encounter some challenges in the workplace because they were used to these issues in broader society. However, some expected institutions to create safe spaces, community support groups, training for other faculty and staff, and systems to report incidences of bias or discrimination. The expectation for these types of institutional support were rarely met. One of our participants, Alley Cat, a genderqueer Asian American adoptee from California at a public university, shared, "One of the biggest challenges was funding. Students had to advocate to get funding for LGBT events, so our office had to provide temporary events." Only 3 participants highlighted that their institutions had employee identity-based groups, and half of all participants mentioned colleagues and supervisors were their main sense of support. And a third of participants actually mentioned students or student groups as their greatest sense of support. So a couple things I do want to mention here is that oftentimes there are assumptions of, if we're in this state or that state or a big city or, in this type of a location, there's an assumption that LGBTQ people are going to be accepted, or the climate for BIPOC individuals is going to be better. And what we found is, regardless of the location that our people were coming from, our participants were coming from, or regardless of the type of institution that they were at, there were a lot of the same type of institutional barriers and sense of not being able to fit in or being fully accepted. And so that's something that definitely gives me pause to really think about, in understanding that, it's not simply like, oh, I'm in California, which is known to be a liberal state, so therefore I'm going to have all of these supports with my identity. That wasn't necessarily the case. And the other thing that was extremely surprising was a third of participants mentioning that students and student groups were their greatest sense of support at work, meaning the individuals in which they were intended to be serving were actually providing a service to them, for them to be comfortable and have that motivation to show up to work every day. The other theme was limited views of diversity. So in today's current cultural landscape and at institutions of higher education, the term diversity is a key word for a single identity, which is usually race, but could possibly be gender or even sexual orientation. Several participants pointed to their frustration of the single identity view of diversity. Ben, a queer mixed race male administrator at a private liberal arts school in Minnesota, shared with us, "We are a really strong school in LGBT issues, but race is still an issue. It seems like they like folks of color as people, but not as a group. It can feel or seem as if they are merely tolerated or worse, just a body count for the university." Similarly, Jamie, a lesbian, queer, Black staff member at a large public institution in the Midwest, shared, "One of the challenges is having to speak up when diversity only includes race and ethnicity. Yes, I care about and support students of color. That's not all that diversity is." And so again, there are participants feeling as if they need to be the ones to really bring up that intersectional perspective and really challenge and broaden what the conversation is when, the words diversity are being thrown around. So we did highlight some recommendations that we felt would be helpful in supporting QT BIPOC faculty and staff at colleges and universities. The first thing was to analyze policies to ensure inclusivity. So reviewing benefit options, making sure supports for transgender specific healthcare and anti-discrimination policies are there, and that correct language is being used, and that all people are being covered by the anti-discrimination policies. Also, when conducting campus climate studies, making sure to include faculty and staff perspectives and an intersectional analysis. So it's not just enough to look at faculty of color and staff of color, but really looking at gender, sexual orientation, and any other identities that might be shared within a campus climate study, such as religion or ability, to really try to see what experiences are happening on campus and how an approach can happen. Another recommendation is to provide both campus and local resource options for multiple marginalized identities. So we understand that every university is at a different place in their journey to have resources for all marginalized groups, but it goes a long way to when universities take time to look at what regional or local resources exist that might not exist on campus. Another recommendation was to engage in conversations around difference, but don't always expect marginalized communities to be the only leaders. So ensuring that allies are empowered and encouraged to take leadership roles when it comes to these conversations. Providing training that includes recognizing and addressing microaggressions and discrimination, and ensuring that that training is not just a check mark to say that it was completed, but really having strong discussion and ongoing training, not a one and done type of experience. Another thing that we recommend that would be extremely helpful would be to provide financial and human resources to start identity-based groups, support groups at colleges and universities. So having these types of employee support groups really makes the university much more marketable. And the university or college should therefore acknowledge and provide some support to the individuals who are leading those groups so they don't fizzle out when turnover happens or when someone just becomes too exhausted to continue leading the charge. Lastly, we would say to provide adequate bias awareness training for search committees. This is extremely crucial, especially in this time where most universities or colleges are highlighting and talking about the importance of having quote unquote diverse university community. And part of that is to ensuring that the search committee and the search recruitment process doesn't have embedded biases throughout. And the search committee is well trained and understands that they're not using coded words such as fit to unnecessarily weed people out who might be providing just a different life experience or different identities to the university. So that's what we have for you today. We encourage you to keep in touch. Our contact information is here. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of the symposium. Thank you.